Welcome friends to this course on understanding absurdist drama. We are in week 2 and this is going to be lecture number 2. Today we'll discuss Samuel Beckett's famous play Waiting for Godot. Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot was originally written in French, titled as In Attendant Godot. It was written around 1948-1949 and was first published in 1952 by Editions de Minuit in Paris. Beckett later translated the play into English, with the English version being published by Faber and Faber in 1954. The first performance of the play took place on January 5, 1953 at the Théâtre de Babylone in Paris, directed by the world-famous director Roger Blin. Despite initial skepticism due to its unconventional structure and abstract content, the play became a sensation and gained widespread critical attention, solidifying its place in the theatre of the absurd. The first English language performance was held at the Arts Theatre in London on August 3, 1955, directed by Peter Hall. Though early reviews were mixed, the play soon gained acclaim for its innovative portrayal of existentialist themes. Waiting for Godot is a play about nothingness. It's a play in which nothing happens, nobody comes, nobody goes, it's awful. Now these lines from the play are symbolical of the content of the play. In the play, on a desolate country road marked only by a bare mound and solitary tree, Vladimir and Stragon, two vagabond tramps of uncertain age, engage in disjointed conversation as they wait for a mysterious person named Godot. Their idle chatter is interrupted by the arrival of Pozzo, a pompous landowner, and his degraded, almost animal-like servant Lucky. What follows is surreal and bewildering exchange, culminating in Lucky's maniac outburst. As Pozzo and Lucky depart, a boy arrives to inform the pair that Godot will not come today, but promises he will come tomorrow. Vladimir and Stragon briefly consider suicide, but remain motionless as the curtain falls. Act 2 mirrors the first, the same time, the same place, but now Pozzo is blind and Lucky mute. The boy delivers the same message once again, saying Godot will not come today, but Godot will come tomorrow. Vladimir and Stragon, though contemplating departure, do not move and the play ends. In order to understand the play, it is essential that we read certain dialogues from the play, and this will give us an idea into the major themes of the play that is at discussion. The play starts with a dialogue by Stragon, and he says, "Nothing to be done." Now what is this nothing? Whether Stragon is totally free, absolutely free, he has nothing to do, that's what nothingness implies, that there is no work that Stragon has. However, the sentence is very significant. It says nothing to be done. How can nothing be done? And therefore, it also gives us a sense that what we are doing every day in our day-to-day life is also nothing, and therefore this performance of nothing has to be repeated every day, time and again. Let us look at the dialogues further. So, we begin with nothing to be done, and nothingness is a philosophical concept. Vladimir goes further and says, "I am beginning to come round to that opinion. All my life I have tried to put it away from me, saying, 'Vladimir, be reasonable, you have not yet tried everything.' And I resumed the struggle." And he broods, musing on the struggle, turning to Stragon, "So there you are again." Stragon says, "Am I?" Vladimir says, "I am glad to see you back. I thought you were gone forever." Now this interesting conversation between Vladimir and Stragon clearly exemplifies the existentialist themes. Vladimir is meditating upon the struggles of his life. He is meditating upon the problems of his life, the troubles of his life, the difficulties of his life, and he is also conscious of the boredom of his struggle. However, what Vladimir does, he says, I resumed. And the word resume is very important. You remember the famous essay we discussed in the previous classes, The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, where Sisyphus also resumes his task of rolling the rock to the top of the mountain. Similarly here, the focus is on the resumption of day-to-day activities of human beings. So we struggle, we suffer, but we resume our struggle every day. Every day is a new struggle. This also makes us understand that Vladimir and Estragon, they have met before, as it is implied by the line, I thought you were gone forever. So they have met before and they have been separated. Why they have been separated? Those of us who have read the play, we know that during the daytime they pass the time together, and at night they depart, they separate, and that's why Vladimir is talking about this idea that I thought you were gone forever. There is another very important philosophical question that Estragon asks. When Vladimir says, so there you are again, Estragon self-reflexively asks, am I? Now this am I is a question mark. Estragon doubts his own existence. Descartes has famously talked about his philosophy of doubt, where he says, I think therefore I am. Descartes argues that we can doubt that the world exists, we can doubt that the God exists, we can doubt that other people exist, but we cannot doubt that the one who doubts exists. And therefore, this a self-reflexive question that Estragon asks is proof of his existence, that Estragon exists. The moment Estragon asks, am I, that becomes the moment of the existence of Estragon. So we have to understand here that this play is about being and nothingness. Estragon says nothing to be done, thereby he philosophizes the idea of nothingness. Nothingness also implies no thingness, that human beings are not things, they exist. Why they exist? Because they have a consciousness, that they can think, therefore that they exist. Estragon also confirms his existence through an interrogative question mark on his existence by asking, am I? This play is also about suffering. If life is meaningless, if life is worthless, if life is purposeless, if there is nothing to be done, what will human beings experience? There are possibilities. One possibility is that of boredom. When I know that I have to repeat the same thing again and again, I may be bored of what I am doing. And boredom is inseparably, inextricably linked to suffering. I have already told you how Buddha philosophizes suffering by saying that the world is suffering. Beckett's concern in the play is also on suffering, because Beckett believes that human nature is preconditioned for suffering. All human beings suffer, whether their suffering is physical or emotional. Let us look at the dialogues of the play to understand the nature of suffering. Estragon says, taking off my boot, did that never happen to you? Vladimir says, boots must be taken off every day. I am tired telling you that, why don't you listen to me? Estragon says, help me. Vladimir says, hurts. Estragon says, hurts? He wants to know if it hurts. Vladimir says, no one ever suffers but you. I don't count. I would like to hear what you would say if you had what I have. It hurts, hurts. He wants to know if it hurts. What do you expect? You always wait till the last moment. Hope deferred maketh the something sick. Who said that? This conversation is a very interesting conversation on the nature of human life and suffering. We have two tramps, Vladimir and Stragon, and both of them are suffering. Stragon is suffering because of his boots, and Vladimir would suffer, as we would know later, because of his hats. Vladimir tries to take off his hat, which he can easily do. But the problem is with Stragon. Although he is trying his best to take off his boots, he is unable to. Therefore, he wants some kind of help from Vladimir, which he refuses. Now, what boot stands for in the play? Boot is a metaphor. You remember, when we put our foot into the boot, our foot is bound by the boot, and therefore we have to understand that boot becomes metaphor of life, and they symbolize the life of captivity, life of imprisonment, where human beings are not free, and because they feel unfree, they also feel suffocated, and due to this suffocation they experience suffering. Now we have to understand that boots of Stragon are causing immense psychological suffering. Stragon says his boots are hurting him. Vladimir tells him that no one ever suffers but you, I don't count. No one ever suffers you. That is a philosophy that Beckett proposes. Whether you have your father who loves you, or you have your mother who loves you, or you have friends or other relationships in which you go to those people and you want to be consoled so that you don't suffer. Beckett is simply proposing that despite our best efforts, we are bound to suffer, and our suffering cannot be shared by anyone. Although we may find momentary consolation when we have our loved ones who are trying to console us, but that consolation will be temporary, will be momentary. And therefore one has to live with this understanding that suffering is part of human existence, and I have to cultivate and develop an attitude where I suffer but I don't suffer the suffering. I have sorrow but I don't suffer that sorrow. And that's why Vladimir prophetically says, no one suffers but you. He also says, I don't count. I cannot help you in the process of your suffering. I cannot share your suffering. Even if you tell me that you are suffering, I will not be able to ease or minimize your suffering or lessen your suffering. Again, Stragon says, it hurts, hurts. He wants to know if it hurts. And then Stragon says, what is the fate of man? The fate of man is to suffer till the last moment. We suffer till we die. Only death perhaps can release us from the suffering that we are experiencing. That may not also be a possibility, because we do not know what happens to us after our death, what awaits us after our death. And then there is a very philosophical statement made by Vladimir, who says, hope deferred maketh the something sick. Now this statement is a philosophical statement. Basically, this is a biblical proverb. The exact proverb is, hope deferred maketh the heart sick. The word hope is important here. As you already know that Vladimir and Stragon are waiting for Godot. They have hope that Godot will come. Although every day their hope is thwarted. A boy comes and announces that Godot will not come today, Godot will come tomorrow. But they have hope. Problem is that this hope is being postponed, this hope is being delayed. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, till we realize, like Shakespeare makes Macbeth say in the play Macbeth, it is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. What Shakespeare is saying? Shakespeare is saying life is a story. Whose story? The story of a fool who did not know that he was a fool. And what his story was full of? His story was full of sound and fury, noise. But was it meaningful? Did it have any purpose? Shakespeare says no, signifying nothing. It has no meaning. Now something similar is being echoed by Beckett. Beckett is saying all human beings indulge in the same action again and again. They hope for arrival of God, symbolizing Godot, or they also hope for death to arrive. If one is positive, one would look for redemption, one would look for salvation, one would look for God. If one is pessimistic, negative, one would wait for the arrival of death. But in between, while we are waiting for God or we are waiting for death, what we experience? We experience sickness. And what is that sickness? Sickness of heart. Why our heart is sick? Because it suffers from boredom, it suffers from monotony, it suffers from boredom and monotony caused by habit. Habit, Beckett says in his other play, Endgame, a great deadener. So we have to understand that this play is about suffering. How human beings have to suffer till they die. There is no respite, there is no easing of that suffering. Now we would move to another very important idea that Beckett is trying to explore in this play. That is the idea of salvation. That is the idea of mukti. That is the idea of moksha, nirvana, kaivalya, whatever name you want to give it, you can give that. Redemption you can call it, whatever you want to call it. That is a very interesting idea. Beckett is saying, if human beings are suffering, is death going to provide a respite from suffering? Is death going to liberate us from suffering, emancipate us from suffering? Or one has to suffer even after one's death? What is the possibility? Will there be any end to suffering or not? That becomes a very important question for Beckett. And let us read these dialogues to understand what is Beckett's take on the idea of salvation. Vladimir says, yes, the two thieves. Do you remember the story? Estragon says, no. Vladimir says, shall I tell it to you? Estragon says, no. Vladimir says, it will pass the time. Two thieves crucified at the same time as our Savior. One, our what? Our Savior. Two thieves. One is supposed to have been saved and the other damned. Now, you would remember the story of crucifixion of Christ. When Christ was crucified, two thieves were crucified along with Christ. One was called the penitent thief, the good thief, wise thief, thief on the cross. And the other one was called impenitent thief, who was unrepentant. When Christ was being crucified, on the left side of Christ was the impenitent thief, unrepentant thief. The impenitent thief told Christ, if you are Son of God, why don't you save us and save yourself? The penitent thief was kind and benevolent to Christ. He scolded the impenitent thief and said, Jesus, Christ, remember us when you are in heaven. And Christ said, Amen. The story of the penitent thief and the impenitent thief has found a mention in the Gospel of Luke, where it is written, and I quote, now one of the criminals hanging there reviled Jesus, saying, are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. The other, however, rebuking him, said in reply, "Have you no fear of God, for you are subject to the same condemnation? And indeed, we have been condemned justly, for the sentence we received correspond to our crimes. But this man has done nothing criminal." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied to him, "Amen, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is a story of the penitent thief and impenitent thief in the Gospel of Luke. Gospel of John does not mention the story at all, while Gospels of Matthew and Mark say that both the thieves mocked Jesus. None of them were penitent or repentant. Now, this biblical story has been reinterpreted and creatively used by Beckett in the play Waiting for Godot. You see, if human beings are suffering, what is the possibility of their redemption? If Godot is Jesus Christ and Vladimir and Estragon are two thieves, the penitent thief and impenitent thief, what is the possibility of their redemption? What is the possibility of their salvation? Whether they will get moksha, nirvana, salvation, redemption or not, that becomes a very important question. Vladimir says two thieves, one is supposed to have been saved and the other damned. So the penitent thief, as per the Gospel of Luke, was saved. He went to heaven with Jesus Christ. And the impenitent thief, the unrepentant thief, went to hell. He was damned. Now, what is the possibility of redemption? See, there are 4 Gospels. Out of 4 Gospels, only 3 Gospels mention the story of the penitent thief and impenitent thief. In 2 Gospels, both the thieves mocked Jesus Christ. So there is only one Gospel where it is being suggested that one of the thieves was saved. Now this is what you can call 25% possibility of redemption, 25% possibility of salvation. Now that is the hope human beings have. There is a hope, some hope. That hope may be faint, that hope may be weak, may be vulnerable, but there is some hope that human beings can be liberated, can be emancipated, and of course they have to wait for their liberation or emancipation, like Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot in the play Waiting for Godot. Now, we also have to understand that while Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot, they are suffering, and of course they are waiting for their salvation, for their redemption. What they are experiencing in between? They are experiencing loneliness. Loneliness is a very important aspect of existentialist philosophy. It is a condition which characterizes human existence. Now let us look at the dialogues in the play to understand how Beckett defines loneliness. Estragon says, "I was asleep. Why will you never let me sleep?" Vladimir says, "I felt lonely." Estragon says, "I had a dream." "Don't tell me. I dreamt that. Don't tell me. This one is enough for you. It's not nice of you, Didi. Who am I to tell my private nightmares to if I cannot tell them to you? Let them remain private. You know, I cannot bear them." What one has to understand here, that Vladimir and Estragon are a pair. They are always together. The moment they are separated, they become lonely and they start looking for someone's company. What one has to understand here, that while Estragon is sleeping, he is not alone. His sleep is marked by some dream. Alright? And while Vladimir is alone, what he is feeling? He is feeling lonely. And therefore, the condition of Vladimir and Estragon is the same. Both are suffering. One is suffering in his dream while the other is suffering in his wakefulness. In fact, Estragon is asleep. He wants to tell his private nightmares to Vladimir, which he refuses to listen to, because he knows even if he listens to the private nightmares of Vladimir, he cannot ease his suffering, he cannot lessen his suffering. Although Estragon believes that if he is able to share his private nightmares to someone, his suffering will be minimized. And therefore, what Estragon wants his suffering to be passed on to Vladimir, which Vladimir is not ready to accept. And therefore, Beckett is suggesting that human condition is essentially marked by loneliness and the consequent suffering it causes. Now the question that we should ask ourselves, why this suffering? Why this loneliness? If death is certain, if salvation is certain, we should not suffer. We are suffering because we are in self-doubt, and therefore doubt becomes a very important philosophical idea for Beckett. Let's examine the dialogue regarding doubt in the play to understand what philosophical relevance or significance it has in the play. Vladimir says, I don't know a willow. Estragon says, where are the leaves? Vladimir says, it must be dead. Estragon says, no more weeping. Vladimir says, or perhaps it is not the season. Estragon says, looks to me more like a bush. Vladimir says, a shrub. Estragon says, a bush. Vladimir says, what are you insinuating? That we have come to the wrong place. We all know that Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot near a tree, as they tell us that Godot has promised them to wait by that tree. This tree can also be the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, the biblical tree. However, one has to understand that Vladimir and Estragon are uncertain what is this tree. This is a tree, but there are no leaves, and because there are no leaves, they cannot know the name of the tree. In fact, they are not only uncertain about the name of the tree, they are also uncertain about its species, whether it is a bush or a shrub, that they are debating. Whether it is a willow tree or it is a bush or it is a shrub, they are not certain about anything. Why they are uncertain about it? They are uncertain about it because Vladimir says one of the most philosophical statements of the play that you need to focus on, and that is, I don't know. In fact, all existentialist plays are marked by this philosophical aspect. How can human beings be certain of life? Can we know what is to happen? If you ask me today what is going to happen to me next day, I would not be able to tell you. If I ask you the same question, you will not be able to tell me what is going to happen next day. So if we cannot tell what is going to happen next day, how can we think that we can control our future, we can regulate our future? And therefore, this wait for future to become present is a futile wait. And therefore, in the play Waiting for Godot, waiting is granting Vladimir and Estragon both hope and also a sense of futility of their waiting. But they have nowhere to go, they have nothing to do, therefore they are waiting because that waiting is granting them some purpose, some meaning in life. So, uncertainty is another important philosophical aspect that characterizes the play Waiting for Godot. This idea is further explored through the conversation between Vladimir and Estragon. Estragon says, and if he does not come, we'll come back tomorrow, and then the day after tomorrow, possibly, and so on. The point is, unless he comes, you are merciless. We came here yesterday. No, there you are mistaken. What did we do yesterday? What did we do yesterday? Yes. Why? Nothing is certain when you are about. Now, Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot. Godot has promised them to come, but Godot does not come today. And a boy comes and announces that Godot will come tomorrow. The same thing happens the next day. And it is being suggested that the same thing will continue to happen every day till infinity, till eternity. And therefore, one has to understand that there is also a possibility that Godot may never come. So, if Godot may never come, what will happen? Let us understand it differently. For example, we believe in God and we believe that God will come one day, or God will give his darshan to us one day. What if there is no God? Or what if there is God but he will not come? He won't interfere into our life. What will happen in that case? Now, Vladimir and Estragon, they are suggesting that even if Godot never comes or God never comes, they have no choice but to wait for the arrival of God/Godot. They have no option. They are born, they have to live before they die. So, as long as they are living, they have to have some hope. Then, they are also very interesting, or you can call unusual characters. They don't remember what did they do yesterday, because philosophically they want to indicate that there is no past, there is no future. Even if you try to remember your past, what is the meaning of remembering the past? If you try to imagine what awaits for you in future, there is no point in awaiting for your future. There is no meaning as far as waiting for the future is concerned. Why? Beckett is suggesting that what matters the most is present. Past is meaningless, future is meaningless, although human beings either live in past or they live in future, and that's why they are unhappy. They are unhappy because they are unable to live in the moment. And therefore, the source of happiness is living in the moment. If one can be in the moment, one will be happy. One is unhappy because one is either living in the past or living in the future. Now, we move to another very important philosophical idea associated with philosophy of existentialism and absurdity. And that is the idea of suicide. If life is meaningless, life is worthless, life is purposeless, why not to end it? Why not to commit suicide? Why not to die before death comes to us? That becomes a very important philosophical question. Now let us look at how these two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, these two jokers, Vladimir and Estragon, reflect upon the idea of suicide. Vladimir says, what do we do now? Wait. Yes, but while waiting, what about hanging ourselves? It would give us an erection. Let us hang ourselves immediately. From above, I would not trust it. We can always try. Go ahead, after you. No, you first. Why me? You are lighter than I am. Now, you see, Vladimir and Estragon are waiting for Godot. They cannot go anywhere. They cannot move anywhere. Godot has promised them to come, but Godot does not come every day. Godot always comes tomorrow, and that tomorrow never comes. So while waiting, what should they do? They have to pass their time. How will they pass their time? They can talk to each other. That's what they are doing. They are talking to each other, and by talking to each other, they are passing the time. They have nothing else to do. They indulge in petty activities that they are performing in the play. Now suddenly, they think of committing suicide. Estragon proposes, what about hanging ourselves? What about hanging ourselves? Let us hang ourselves. Let us commit suicide. Why? Why should they commit suicide? Vladimir says it would give us an erection. Now, it is a folk belief, and there are some who argue that it is also a scientific belief, that when people commit suicide, they experience erection. There is some mild form of arousal. Now you see, so can death be that kick in life? If life cannot stir them because they are bored of their life, can death be a moment of stirring for them? And therefore they decide that they should commit suicide. But the question remains, there is a tree, there are two people, who should commit the suicide first? Whether Vladimir should commit the suicide first or Estragon should commit suicide first. Who should commit suicide first? What is your opinion? Vladimir or Estragon? Now Vladimir says that Estragon should commit suicide first. Why? Suppose Estragon commits suicide and after that Vladimir does not commit suicide. Imagine there are two lovers, they together decide that they have to commit suicide. Now one of them commits suicide before and the other does not commit suicide. There can be a betrayal, there can be a dhokha, that is a possibility. So Estragon says you commit the suicide first, Vladimir says no, you commit the suicide first. Then Vladimir says use your mind, use your intelligence, you should commit suicide first. And what is his reason? Vladimir says you are lighter than I am. Estragon is thin, Vladimir is fat. Vladimir fears that bough of the tree might not be strong enough to hold both of them together. And therefore he suggests that first Estragon should go and check whether the bough will hold the weight of one person or not. He says go light, bough not break, go dead, DD heavy, bough break, DD alone. Now Vladimir's argument is very clear. If Estragon's attempt is successful and the bough holds, Vladimir could follow, but if bough breaks, Vladimir would remain alone, which terrifies him. And therefore the fear of being abandoned drives much of the interaction about suicide here. Ultimately, Vladimir and Estragon would postpone suicide. They would wait for the arrival of Godot. They would like to hear from Godot what Godot has to say or what Godot has to speak. And this postponement of suicide is very meaningful because philosophy of the absurd does not promote suicide or committing suicide. It suggests even if life is meaningless, even if life is worthless, it has to be lived because any meaning in the absence of meaning can be granted to life. These are some of the aspects that we discussed today. We will continue our discussion of the play in the next class when we meet. Thank you everyone.